Week 17 of the fantasy football season and championship week. Here's the top 20 quarterbacks. I'm ranking this week number 1, Lamar Jackson of the Baltimore Ravens. So an MVP season, once again, it's been for Lamar. Weekly 25-30 fantasy points. And this week could be a high-scoring game at the Texans once again. Well, I believe in minimum Lamar will get his 25-30 fantasy points. Like I said, Texans defense hasn't been all that great this season, and this week I believe he's the number 1 performer. To Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills, it's been a great season once again. Him and Lamar, the top 2 quarterbacks all season in fantasy football. This week a great matchup versus the New York Jets, where their defense can't stop anyone this season. And I think Josh Allen, he'll go out there, have his usual game. I know last week was a hiccup. He didn't put up fantasy points, and he hurt his hand a little bit hitting it on a defender's helmet. But this week, I think he bounces back. And when do you ever see Allen with 2 bad games in a row? So with a good matchup and coming off a bad game, you know he'll be motivated to go out there and have a good one. Number 3, Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles. I know Hurts, he's in concussion protocol. He might not play. And if you don't, obviously, you just rank him off the list. But I believe he's got a shot at playing. This is a Sunday game versus division rival, the Dallas Cowboys. And they're still trying to fight for that number 1 seed. Is Philadelphia, after the Lions have only 2 losses on the season. So this week in a good matchup versus a Cowboy defense that can't stop anyone. As long as he gives it a go, is Jalen Hurts. He's got a great track record versus the Cowboys, and I believe he could go out there and have a big game. Number 4, Jaden Daniels, the Washington Commanders. So what a rookie season it's been for Jaden Daniels. He's putting a lot of points on the board this year. Last week, a big come-from-behind victory versus the Philadelphia Eagles. And this week, another good matchup versus the Atlanta Falcons, where I don't think their defense is all that great. They're coming to Washington, where they're worse on the road than they are at home indoors. So this week, I think Daniels, him and McLaurin will get things going once again. He's been running the football again very well with Daniels after he was banged up early in the season with a rib injury, and he stopped running, but now back to his game, and he looks healthy. He's definitely one of the top quarterbacks this week. Number 5, Joe Burrow of the Cincinnati Bengals. I know Burrow, he's a little down on this list, Joe Burrow, I know, this week. But obviously, it's a tougher matchup versus the Denver Broncos, where I just think those quarterbacks have a little bit of better matchups. But it wouldn't be surprising to me if Burrow goes out there and puts up the usual numbers, 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, like he's done weekly when you got wide receivers like Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Chase Brown out of the backfield. So this week, even in a tougher matchup versus Denver, I think he could go out there and perform a good ball game. Number 6, Baker Mayfield of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Baker Mayfield, it's been a great second season for him with Tampa Bay. He got the big contract extension in the offseason. And this week, a great matchup versus one of his former teams, the Carolina Panthers. I know he only spent a half a season there a few years ago, but you know he's going to want to stick it to them a little bit. Is Baker Mayfield. He's got a big arm. Him and Mike Evans are locked in, and he's the ultimate gunslinger, taking chances down the field, keep making plays. And this week in a good matchup versus the Panthers, I believe once again he's one of the better quarterbacks. Number 7, Jared Goff of the Detroit Lions. Offense has been one of the best, if not the best, all season long. And when you got plays like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, who's had a breakout season, and Sam Laporta, who's been coming on of late finally, it's going to be easier for Jared Goff. So Goff, he's putting up a lot of yards weekly for this Detroit Lion team and fantasy owners. And this week in a decent matchup at San Francisco, where their defense hasn't been great and been banged up over the last few weeks. Yeah, I think he'd go in San Francisco on Monday night and have a good game. Like I said, they're moving the football easily down the field. They're blowing teams out the majority of the season. And Goff, he's putting up 25-plus fantasy points the last month of the season. Number 8, Bo Nix of the Denver Broncos. So maybe he's a little bit high on my list here is Bo Nix, but he's played great football the last 2 months of the season. So Nix, we know he's limited weapons in his offense. Cortland Sutton, the number 1 option for this Denver Bronco team. But Bo Nix is going out there. He's making plays. He's shooting yards with his legs as well. And this week in a matchup in a potential high-scoring game at Cincinnati, where we know their defense can't stop anyone, I think Bo Nix could go out there and surprise owners with a good ball game. Number 9, Sam Darnold of the Minnesota Vikings. So Sam Darnold, what a season it's been for him. He's going to get a big money contract in the offseason, either from Minnesota or another team. And this week, it's going to be a division matchup versus the Packers. So I know the Packers, on Monday night, they shut out the New Orleans Saints. But this Minnesota Viking team, obviously, one of the best offenses in the league. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, Aaron Jones out of the backfield. So this week, I could see a potential high-scoring game between these 2 division rivals. And the good thing about this for Darnold, it's an indoor game at home in Minnesota instead of going to Lambeau on the frozen tundra over there. Number 10, Jordan Love staying in the same game with the Green Bay Packers. So last week he didn't have to do much in that game, was Jordan Love. It was a blowout from the get-go. Josh Jacobs took over, had a big game, and the defense dominated. But this week they know they got to put points on the board. And Jordan Love getting that extra rest might help a little bit as well towards the end of that ball game, where he only had to play, realistically, only 2 quarters with Jordan Love. So this week, even versus a good defense in Minnesota, I believe it's a high-scoring game between division rivals. And I think Jordan Love goes out there and has a top 10 performance. Number 11, Justin Herbert of Los Angeles Chargers. So this week, good matchup on paper at the New England Patriots. Possibility J.K. Dobbins returns to the lineup as well, what opens up the passing game. And Justin Herbert, we know he's a gunslinger. We know he's got a good arm. And he is a top 5 overall talent, I believe, at the quarterback position. So with Ladd McConkey back over the last few weeks, he's been going out there. He's been making plays as Justin Herbert. And this week, even in a ball game where it's going to be cold and scoring could be a little bit limited, I think he goes out there and has a good performance. Number 12, Patrick Mahomes of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Patrick Mahomes, he was healthy last week, surprisingly, and played that game. But I said it in those previous videos that Mahomes, he never misses games, and he guts it out, and that's exactly what he did. So now this week in a matchup, Christmas Day tomorrow at the Pittsburgh Steelers, it's going to be a tougher matchup, no doubt about it. Weather's going to be freezing, possibly snow in that one, but Mahomes and this offense is getting healthy as they could be. Pacheco's been back over the last month. Hollywood Brown returned last week. Xavier Worthy more into the playbook. Hopkins, he's been a decent acquisition in a trade. So I think Mahomes could go out there even in a tougher matchup where they know they got to put points on the board. And Travis Kelce is due as well to have a breakout game. Number 13, Brock Purdy of the San Francisco 49ers. So Brock Purdy, it's been an up and down season for him and the Niners. Last week, another bad loss at the Miami Dolphins. And this week, the Lions are coming to town. But the thing is, he's going to have to throw early and often, I believe, in this game, especially if Isaac Guerrero was out. The running game's pretty much non-existent, even though Deebo Samuel still get 8 to 10 touches in the backfield in this game. So Brock Purdy, they still got good weapons in the offense. George Kittle, one of the best tight ends in the league. Juwan Jennings, Deebo Samuel, Ricky Pearsall, maybe he could get things going. But it's a game they're most likely going to be chasing points from the get-go. And I think Purdy's going to have to throw a whole lot. 14, Kyler Murray for the Arizona Cardinals. It's been a disappointing season, no doubt about it, for Kyler Murray, in my opinion, in fantasy football. A lot of games where it's only that 15, 20-point fantasy day. Last week, he salvaged towards the end of the game, and you figured his numbers would be better adding Marvin Harrison in the offseason to go with Trey McBride and James Conner out of the backfield. But this week, it's a pretty decent matchup at the Los Angeles Rams. Indoor game where he's had a decent track record versus Ram team, even going back to early in the season with a big game where the Cardinals put up 42 points in that game. I believe Murray, the ceiling just isn't high for whatever reason this year. His rushing yards have gone down as well. 15, Anthony Richardson of the Indianapolis Colts. Anthony Richardson, it hasn't been a good year for him. He was a high draft pick in a lot of fantasy leagues this year, going 5th, 6th round at worst case, and the 5th quarterback off the board is Richardson. And a lot of people thought he was going to get a lot of rushing upside was Richardson, but that just hasn't been the case, especially with Jonathan Taylor back there having another good season. But this week, a good matchup at the New York Giants, a defense that hasn't stopped anyone, and they're obviously tanking for that number 1 pick. So I think Richardson, he could go out there. They got decent weapons. Josh Downs, Taylor out of the backfield, and his running ability, and be a top 15 option. 16, Tua of the Miami Dolphins. So last week, it was a little bit of a down game versus the 49ers. And we know Tua on the road's a different quarterback than he is at home. On the road, the numbers have been down throughout his career. The weather should be cold at Cleveland, where he's been bad in cold weather as well, is Tua. But this week, his Dolphin team, they know the season's still on the line and they got a chance to make the playoff. Maybe Tua turns things around, has a decent ball game on the road. When you got guys like Tyreek Hill, even though he's had a down year, and Jonnu Smith, who's been a breakout tight end, you're going to put numbers on the board at times. And also Devon Achane, one of the better receiving backs out of the backfield. 17, Caleb Williams of the Chicago Bears. So Caleb Williams, to be honest, most of his points are catch-up and garbage time points for the Chicago Bear team. So this week, a matchup versus Seattle. I believe this could be a closer game than people expect here. The Seattle defense isn't all that great. I know last week they went toe-to-toe with Minnesota and lost a tough one by 3 points towards the end of that game. I still believe Caleb Williams, he could go out there garbage time and not, and put up a decent performance for fantasy owners. But like I said with Caleb, you just don't know what you're going to get weekly from him. Some weeks it's 25 fantasy points, and some weeks 12, 13 fantasy points. 18, Matthew Stafford of the Los Angeles Rams. So last week was a down game for Stafford, cross-country trip, obviously from LA to New York. And this week they're back home versus Arizona, a team he's had a decent track record versus NFL career, and a team he's obviously familiar with playing in the same division in the NFC West. So I think Matthew Stafford, with guys like Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, and even Tyler Higbee back in the lineup finding the end zone last week, it makes things easier for guys to get yards after catch, put up fantasy points. And this week in a matchup versus Arizona, where their defense just gave up 36 points to the Panthers, I think Stafford is a startable option this week, even though he's down on this list. 19, Geno Smith of the Seattle Seahawks. So it's been a mixed bag of results this season for Geno Smith. He got off to a hot start. Then DK Metcalf, he was banged up, not 100%, and he still isn't, I believe, is Metcalf, even though Jackson Smith-Njigba has gone out there and he's been one of the better wide receivers all season long in fantasy football. So this week, a Thursday night game, where those games are usually high scoring, and this bad defense don't really stop anyone. But with a game at Soldier Field, especially at night, things could get a little tricky out there, I believe. So Geno Smith, the ceiling just isn't that high. And the 20th and final quarterback I'm ranking, C.J. Stroud of the Houston Texans. So Stroud, it's been a down season, no doubt about it. And he's lost some good weapons in this offense. Stephon Diggs, he's out for the season. He's missed multiple weeks already with the torn ACL. Tank Dell tore his knee up in multiple places in last week's game. He's out for the season. And Nico Collins, going back early in the season, missed 4 games. So this week in a matchup versus Baltimore, where they got to put up points on the board, no doubt about it, where they did last week too versus Kansas City. He only finished under 20 fantasy points. So pretty much the ceiling, believe it or not, for Stroud, where coming into the year, a lot of people thought he would lead the league in passing yards. His ceiling has only been 15, 18 fantasy points. So this week, even in a potential high-scoring game, I don't think the ceiling's that high, especially with Joe Mixon having a good year in the backfield. He's been a great addition this season, where more touches are going to him. So this week versus Baltimore, I just don't believe he does much as Stroud, and he's number 20. So that's the top 20 quarterbacks I'm ranking for championship week 17 of the fantasy football season.